What's going on, everyone? Ben DeBono here to talk to you about the next question in the Summa Theologica. We are looking at question 48, which is the first question in this two-part subsection on the distinction of good and evil. 48, and the next time we'll do 49, and that's going to bring us to the end of this short treatise on creation. If you remember, when I did the introduction to the treatise on creation, I also did the introductions to the next two, the treatise on the angels and treatise on the work of the 6 days. So feel free to go back and rewatch that video or watch it for the first time if you want to know what's coming up and a couple questions when we hit the treatise on the angels. But for today, question 48, we have 6 articles, and you can see here they all have to do with evil in one way or the other. Now, important to understand, I've mentioned this before, but it's important to understand that when Aquinas talks about evil, he's using it as a phrase that encompasses more than just sin or moral wrongness, or however, whatever phrase we would want to put in that, and what we would typically call evil. He also considers in that, under the umbrella of evil, all types of pain, any type of suffering and everything. And it's an important distinction to make then in terms of how he's using that word and how we might use it. Because as you'll see, which he says at some point in this question, that God actually does create evil in the sense of punishing his creatures at times, at least using Aquinas' definition. Now, within his larger umbrella of that term, where evil can mean any type of suffering, that's an entirely appropriate thing to say. Within our perhaps more narrow usage, where we mean evil to signify that which is morally wrong, saying that God creates evil introduces a whole host of problems, and we probably don't want to go there, right? So just keep that in mind, that Aquinas is using the term broader than we are. All right, so number one, is evil in nature? All sorts of objections here. Every genus is in nature. Aristotle identifies good and evil as genera, therefore evil would be in nature. So, of course, we know that Aquinas is going to be arguing that evil is not in nature. Every difference constituting a species is in nature. Evil is a difference constituting a species of morality. And each extreme of two contraries is in nature. Good and evil are the extremes of contraries. Therefore, both are natures. Evil acts by corrupting what is good. Therefore, it is a being and a nature, because it has the ability to act, to corrupt, and all that good stuff. Evil belongs to the perfection of the universe, according to Augustine. Therefore, it has a nature. But Dionysius says evil is neither a being nor a good. It is not a nature. So, evil must be known from the nature of good. Now, we've already established that good is everything appetible. So it's everything that we would desire, that we would have an appetite for as humans. Therefore, it follows that the being, which again isn't to say that every desire is good, but that at the core of every desire is the desire for something good. So if I desire to rob a bank in order to provide money for my family, my desire to steal is obviously morally wrong, but at the base of that desire is the desire to provide for my family or to have prosperity, or you can see how that would work. Okay, so because of that, every good is appetible. Therefore, it follows that the being and perfection of any nature is called good. Therefore, evil cannot be a good, since it's the absence of good. So, in other words, it's a logical contradiction to call evil in nature, because the being and perfection of any nature is good, since what is good is everything appetible, which applies to every nature. Okay. Objections answered. Aristotle was speaking according to the opinion of his time. His quote can be taken to mean that as good is to the perfection of a nature, evil is to the privation of a nature. Morality receives its nature from the final cause of a thing. Evil is the absence of a cause, and therefore is not part of a species of morality, but is an absence of morality. As said above, evil is a contrary of good in the sense of it being an absence, but not in the sense of it being another nature. And Aquinas is going to get more into, he'll kind of break down this term absence, that evil is a privation rather than negation. Dionysius tells us that evil does not act unless it is joined to some good. Again, going back to the bank robber analogy, I'm not just going to rob a bank unless, I have some good in mind. Okay? So therefore it is good that prompts the action, not evil. Augustine is speaking of evil as it is joined to good. Evil in itself is never part of the perfection of the universe. Okay. Then number 2, is evil found in things? 3 objections here. Number 1, whatever is found in things is something or a privation of something. Dionysius says evil is distant from existence and non-existence, therefore it is not found in things. Being and thing are convertible terms. The previous article denied that evil has beings. It doesn't have a nature, therefore it is not in things. All things are made by God. God makes what is best. Therefore evil is not in what God makes. If the above was true, there would be no prohibitions or penalties. They wouldn't be necessary and they wouldn't exist, since the only reason things like that exist are for the purpose of dealing with evil. All right, argument. As seen in the previous question, the perfection of the universe requires inequality of things. So we talked about that back in question 47. Okay, you can go back there for that discussion. As a result, that means some things are corruptible, and corruptibility is itself an evil that proves the absence of evil in things. Or that proves, the presence of evil in things. This again is where we need to remember Aquinas is using this umbrella term for evil, because as we saw in question 47, that inequality has its root in the wisdom of God. Okay, but we don't want to say God is evil, right? Okay, objections answered. Evil is neither being nor non-being, since it is not pure negation, but a privation. Aquinas is going to come back to this point of negation versus privation a few times. What this means is that I have the negation as a human of not having a third eye in my head. Okay, I don't have a third eye. So the presence of a third eye is negated in me. Would it be good for me to have a good eye or a third eye? Maybe. But to the extent that that is good, that good is negated in me. Okay? Privation is what happens if I didn't have any eyes, right? So what I should have and I don't have, we call that privation. Reply to number 2. Aristotle says being is twofold. So this is another case where we're kind of parsing the term. We talk about evil as being. It depends on which way we mean. So in the first sense, it concerns an entity. In another, it concerns the truth of a proposition. The former is not ever true of evil, but the latter can be. Okay? And then number 3, as proved in the last question regarding inequality of being, God makes what is best in the whole, but not necessarily what is best in every individual part. Okay? So here for objection 3, we're talking about evil in the sense of that broader term of it not necessarily meaning moral evil. All right, number 3, whether evil is in good as its subject. Okay, so is, if something in me is evil, whether we're talking about a defect of a physical defect that's not my fault or a moral defect that is, am I the subject of that evil? Okay, so good is something that exists. Dionysius says evil is not in that which exists. Okay, fair enough. Non-being does not require being as its subject, therefore neither does evil require good as its subject. One contrary is not subject of another. Good and evil are contraries. And Isaiah condemns those who call evil good, which results from good being evil's subject. Okay? Augustine says that evil only exists in good, right? It never exists, which follows from what we've seen before. Evil, it doesn't have some independent existence out there. Okay, argument. Evil is the absence of good, but not every absence of good is evil. And again, here we're kind of seeing more of that negation versus privation. The absence of good can be taken in two senses. Something good which does not exist, this is not evil. The privation of sight in a blind man, that would be evil. Form and privation of the same subject. What did I mean to write there? Did I mean have the same subject? Yes, I think I did. Okay, so form and privation have the same subject. What he means by that is that the blind man is the subject both of the form of man and the privation of blindness. So we talk about the evil of blindness. What's the subject of that evil? The man who is blind. And that can apply to any type of evil. The man who has corruptness, the man is the subject of that, right? Just go down the list of any sin or defect you can think of, and a good thing is the subject of that evil. Therefore, good is the subject of evil. Okay, Dionysius means that evil is not in things as a naturally existing part. Number two, not being in a negative sense does not require a subject. Not being in the sense of not having being, but in a privative sense does. Evil is not opposed to its subject, but to a good inside the subject. So that's going to be a key distinction here, right? So the contrary of evil, because right, that was objection 3, was that, well, two contrary can't be a subject of another contrary. Good and evil are contraries. But the way Aquinas gets around that is by saying that evil is not opposed to its subject that happens to be a good, but a good inside that subject. So the contrary of the evil of blindness is not the man, but is the sight of the man. Okay, so the subject of blindness is not sight, but animal, right? Okay, number 4, and then, just once we have those in place, the warning from Isaiah doesn't really apply because we're not calling good evil. We've broken it down so that we've avoided that error. Okay. Number 4, does evil corrupt the whole good? Well, here are our objections. One contrary wholly corrupts another. Good and evil are contrary. So yes. Augustine says evil hurts by taking away good. Good is a whole, therefore where evil is, it is wholly taken away. Evil takes away good. When something is continually removed, it is at some point consumed unless it is infinite. No created good is infinite. But Augustine says evil cannot wholly consume good. Okay, now we're going to break down what we mean by good a little bit. And this we've already seen in our previous discussion of the blind man versus sight in terms of which one is the subject of evil. So we're going to say that there are 3 types of good that we have to consider when we're thinking about this. There's the good that is opposed to evil and is wholly destroyed when the evil is present. So the contrary of the evil in question. So in the analogy Aquinas has been using about the blind man, that would be sight. It is wholly destroyed by the presence of that evil. The good that is the subject of evil is not destroyed. The blind man himself. And the good that is diminished by evil without being taken away. Now, this one's a little bit harder to kind of get our minds around. The example he uses down here, where he first says that third kind of good suffers not from an absence in quantity, but a remission of quality, is the soul's aptitude for God, the soul's desire for God. It isn't destroyed by the presence of evil, but it is diminished. So it's not an absence of quantity. Its quantity isn't affected. It's still there, but its quality is. It's diminished, diminished, diminished. And he discusses a little bit possibilities to whether or not it can ever be wholly diminished. And you can read more in the article if you're interested in that. Though he doesn't really address it too definitively, which is why I didn't put it in the notes. Okay, so objections answered. What first objection is saying is only true of the good that is the contrary of the evil in question, that is wholly destroyed, the other types aren't. Again, number 2, same type of thing. It just depends on the good being considered. Okay, and then number 3, good aptitudes are able to be diminished infinitely, not of themselves, but accidentally where contrary dispositions are increased. So, if he talks about the soul's aptitude for God, what he's saying is that can be diminished infinitely, not by that aptitude being cut down, but by contrary aptitudes being constructed against it. That just obscure it more and more and more and more and more. Okay. Number 5, whether evil is adequately divided into pain and fault. And this is a note inside of the translation I'm using, and it's important, so I replicated it here, that pain in this case means penalty, not just physical suffering. All right. Objections. Every defect is a kind of evil. All creatures suffer the defect of being unable to preserve their own existence, which is neither a pain nor fault. Irrational creatures have neither pain nor fault. In other words, they might have pain. You know, I can kick my dog and he'll howl. Don't do that, of course. That's merely an analogy. Not in favor of animal cruelty. But, you know, it's not a penalty in the same sense that, you know, going to prison is a penalty. No, I mean, you could even say there, you know, that pets can kind of, to one degree or another, tell when they're in the proverbial doghouse. But anyway, we won't worry about all those distinctions. Yet they suffer corruption and defect, which are evils. In other words, you know, my dog's still going to die, even though he doesn't have moral fault because he's a dog and doesn't have pain in the sense that a human would. Temptation is an evil, but it precedes both fault and pain and doesn't necessarily result in either if the temptation is refused. Argument from authority, and this is one of those weird places, we've seen this before, where the fourth objection is kind of worded as an argument of authority, and then he responds to it down here, but in a way that just kind of strengthens the argument from authority. So I don't know what's going on there, but you know, I just structure it as best I can in the notes. So Augustine says that a thing is evil because it hurts, and whatever hurts is evil. Therefore, all evil falls under pain, and we'll see that fault itself can fall under pain. Okay. So, argument. As has been established, evil is the privation of good. Evil is twofold: the subtraction of a form or integrity of a thing, i.e., such as blindness. That evil is categorized as pain, penalty, suffering, or whatnot. Number 2, the subtraction of a voluntary good. The evil is categorized as a fault. So, subtraction of a voluntary good. That's just a fancy way of saying that I voluntarily choose to remove a good, whereas if I'm born blind, nobody volunteered for that. If I walk over and make you blind by stabbing your eyes out or something equally horrific, I have voluntarily taken that good. That's the distinction there. Okay. Since evil is privation, not negation of good, not every defect is a good. So in other words, like we talked about, that you know, the fact that I don't have a third eye is a defect, I guess, but it's not. It's a negation, not a privation. So it's not an evil defect. And Aquinas is placing this, then, the fact that creatures don't have the ability to preserve their own existence on their own anyway, apart from God, we might say. Maybe that's what he's implying here, though I don't think it's entirely clear that he's necessarily going down that road at the moment. That is actually just part of how the world works, right? Pain and fault divide evil found in voluntary things only. So the whole irrational creature thing is saying, okay, you know, we're not talking about that. We're talking about within humans. And then number 3, temptation is an evil, and this is a good answer. It's an evil already in the fault of the tempter, but not the one tempted. So in other words, temptation does precede fault and evil in the one who is being tempted, and may not even result in either in the one being tempted, but in the tempter, the fault and pain are already present. Okay? And then it says both types of evil, fault and pain, are included in the idea of injury that Augustine is discussing there. And finally for tonight, whether pain has the nature of evil more than fault has. Fault is to pain what merit is to reward. Reward has more good than merit. Therefore, pain has more evil than fault. The greater evil is that which is opposed to the greater good. Pain is opposed to the agent, while fault is opposed to the action. The agent is greater than the action. Pain involves forfeiting the vision of God, since it thwarts the end of that which is in pain. Therefore, pain is the greater evil. So in other words, if I, again, suffer blindness, my sight, my eyes are no longer fulfilling the end that God has set for them. And so that thwarts, God's final cause for my eyes. Argument from authority. Divine wisdom inflicts pain in order to prevent fault. Therefore, fault is the greater evil. Why? Because God wouldn't inflict fault. God would inflict pain. And so fault is worse because of that. All right. Fault is the greater evil for two reasons. One, becomes evil by fault, not by pain. In other words, my blindness doesn't make me evil, but my voluntary choices to do evil make me evil. Okay, so to be punished is not an evil. This is Dionysius, but it is an evil to be made worthy of punishment. That's a great quote. That's one to hang on to. To be punished is not an evil, but it is an evil to be made worthy of punishment. And God is the author of pain, but not of fault. In other words, God does inflict penalty. We see that all throughout the Bible, starting in Genesis, right after the present of evil comes in. And we could go on at length about why God does that. But he never inflicts fault. Okay, important distinction. Okay, and finally, our answers to the objections. All right, number one, fault is not intended because of pain, as merit is because of a reward. Rather, the contrary is true. Okay. The order of action is the more perfect good, since it is the second perfection. Take Aquinas' word for that. And pain removes the subject from the end and the order to the end. In other words, once my eyes are blind, they're no longer ordered to that end, right? But fault does not involve order, but it involves a disorder of the subject. So, I'm not sure how that would apply to the blindness analogy, but whereas one is simply a removal from its natural end, from what it was originally ordered to do, the other one is the dissolution of, or introduces the presence of disorder into that thing. All right, so that's question 48. I thought that it was a good thing to get rid of the little gray bars here on the side, but I feel really close to the camera now. This is just technical conversation, of course, but I'm going to play around with the resolution, see if I can fix it, because I don't necessarily like the extreme close-up angle that has resulted here. Anyway, I'll figure that out, but just letting you know, we might have the gray bars back that are on the side here if I can't come up with a better solution. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The important thing is question 49 will be out within a few days, and we will wrap up the treatise on creation with that one. Until then, I'm Ben DeBono. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.